at the 5% Club, and sharing some insights in terms of our respective areas, and getting a viewpoint on what's the latest, where are we with apprenticeships, and Mark will touch upon what's on the horizon for 2024. We'll then move on to our esteemed panel of speakers, panel discussion, to help give you an employer's perspective in terms of some of the challenges, the lessons learned, the approaches that they've taken with regards to apprenticeships, and we'll have time for a Q&A session before rounding off with some hopefully helpful top tips that you can take forward moving forward as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of your presenters chairing the session today, I'll introduce myself before handing over to Mark. So I'm Adil, I'm Director at Grant Thornton, leading our talent solutions team, who help our clients find the right skills for success. And a big part of our role is helping with apprenticeships. And we're very proud of our commitment to apprenticeships at Grant Thornton as a leading professional services firm. Where currently 20% of our UK workforce are on apprenticeships right up to director level. And it's great to see some of the success from our internal colleagues to date. But also we've been advising and supporting clients in this space, and it's been really great to see how slowly but surely the tide is beginning to turn on apprenticeships as well. So the purpose of this event is really focused on helping to raise awareness of apprenticeships and the benefits, and also how you can align it to support your business growth, and also demystify any misconceptions on apprenticeships, which we know is a constant theme in this space. But before we dive into the session, Mark, great to have you join the session. If you can introduce yourself and a bit about the 5% Club.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adil. So yeah, good morning, everybody. My name's Mark Cameron. I'm the Chief Executive of the 5% Club. I'll start by saying it's great to be working with Grant Thornton. We've got a long-standing relationship and we've got some exciting developments which we're working on together, which will emerge over the course of this year, but more of that later. And it's brilliant to be doing an event like this in National Apprenticeships Week, particularly as I myself started as a 16-year-old apprentice back a while ago now. But actually, I take great pride in my roots and the fact that people start as apprentices, but actually go on to move on to great things. And there's many chief executives in lots of the FTSE 250 and 100 companies who started their life as apprenticeships or in apprenticeships before moving on. What is the 5% Club? It sounds a bit elite, but it's not. It's a simple concept. It's a movement of employers. There's about 1,000 members now, and we're growing at about 25% a year. And we exist really to inspire positive action from employers, to increase the volume of workplace learning they offer, and to make those workplace learning offerings inclusive and accessible to all. So it's a very simple concept. The idea being that if we can get employers to invest, have about 5% of their workforce in earn and learn, and that's apprenticeships, which is very pertinent this week, but grad schemes and sponsored students. And we've just made an announcement today, which I'll come back to a bit later, about the fact that we're recognising T-level placements as an earn and learn scheme within the sponsored student area. So that's what we do. And like I say, we've got 1,000 members. They represent about 1.7 million employees, so that's over 5% of the UK workforce. They've got 77,000 apprentices in their employ, alongside 18,000 on grad schemes and 8,000 sponsored students. So our membership, when it speaks, it's listened to increasingly. And it's great to be working, as I say, Adil, with Grant Thornton, who are one of our newest gold members as well. So congratulations on that. So I'll hand back to you at this stage for the overview from a Grant Thornton perspective.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. And the absolute perfect partner for us to deliver this session to our employees in the room. So just in terms of Grant Thornton's viewpoint, so last year, City and Guilds and the 5% Club conducted research that highlighted that currently 4% of organisations have fully utilised their apprenticeship levy over the last 5 years. Grant Thornton, we're very proud to be part of that 4%. But it's really important that we continue to champion the apprenticeship levy and optimising the levy at a time where we are seeing training budgets be squeezed from a number of our client organisations. In addition, what we have seen is that, as I mentioned in my introduction, that the tide is slowly beginning to turn. So employers on average spent 55.5% of their apprenticeship levy funding. So that's really good progress, beginning to good progress beginning to turn a tide in the right direction. And similarly, Grant Thornton conducted some research last year, at the back end of last year, with over 600 senior leaders from mid-sized organisations as part of our quarterly business outlook tracker. And that research was very focused on skills, and asking our organisations sort of what their approach would be to for 2024. From that research, 60% of organisations, business leaders, agree that more of their employees would be trained using apprenticeship schemes in 2024 than last year. So again, positive insights there from organisations. And this comes at a time where more than 2/3 of businesses are still experiencing unusually high attrition rates, and having that retention challenge, as we know. Attracting talent still remains a key challenge for organisations, with over half of respondents saying they are struggling to recruit. It's a really competitive market, and particularly struggling in terms of attracting diverse talent pool. So definitely an opportunity there through apprenticeships to address that particular gap as well. And as hopefully most of the people in the room will know, or you will know at the end of the session, there's over 600 apprenticeship standards at the moment, and it's highly likely that a skills gap you're looking to address can possibly be addressed through apprenticeships. And we asked what skills areas that they were looking to invest in for this year, for 2024. 80% of businesses agreed that they were looking to significantly invest in areas of digital and data skills, leadership skills, and some finance skills as well. And of course, we are seeing emerging areas such as AI, and particularly around green skills, and supporting the wider ESG agenda. So that's a Grant Thornton sort of viewpoint and perspective. As I mentioned in my introduction, we are advising and supporting clients in this space. And what's great to see, as I mentioned, the tide is beginning to turn, is that HR communities and finance are beginning to come close together to look at the apprenticeships opportunity as a collective. So Mark, I'd like to hand back to you to discuss what's on the horizon for 2024.
Fabulous. Well, I don't think there's much on the horizon, actually, Adil, because the political climate is very stable. I think global events are working in our favour, so not a huge amount. But I think, actually, you know, joking aside, that there's quite a lot, and there's quite a lot of noise in the skill space. And I think as an employer, it's quite hard on occasions to cut through that to understand exactly what's going on. And I think what we'll see across the course of this year, despite some of the interesting exchanges in the House of Commons, we won't dwell on those, but actually we'll start to see both parties get a bit more clear on a few issues, and that includes skills. I think you mentioned the Levying Up report that was commissioned in partnership with City and Guilds last year.
Yeah.
And I think this time last year, many of you will recall the current Skills Minister, Robert Halfon, talking a lot about fake news and a lot about misconceptions. And I think at that stage, what was going on is people were talking about money being returned to the Treasury as if there was real money in people's levy accounts, and that money, if not spent, would go back to the Treasury. And that started to irritate people, because that's not how the system works at all. So it's just worth reminding people how the system works. It's relatively straightforward. Those with an employment wage bill above £3 million spend about, or are taxed effectively to 0.5% of that spend, and that goes to the Treasury. And that is around 3 billion and growing a year. And that money is then passed around the nations of the UK through the Barnett formula, which passes a degree of funding to the Department for Education as they agree a spending plan over 5 years, and that was agreed 2 or 3 years ago. And it's also then passed to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And those of you who've been tracking the apprenticeship debate will realise when it goes into the devolved administrations, it's not as clear, perhaps, as it is in England, where that money goes and how ring-fenced, to quote the phrase, it actually is. And there's a particular issue in Wales at the moment where apprenticeship programmes are being cut, which is not good for the overall approach. But actually in England, what happened was back in 2 or 3 years ago, it was agreed that the Department for Education would get 2.5 billion, grown to 2.7 billion over the course of the Parliament to 2025. And that 2.7 billion is what is passed back to the Department for Education for their programme. And there's a degree of money that lands in people's accounts, which is uplifted. But if you were to obviously take all the money in the accounts, it adds up to far more than 2.5 billion or 2.7 billion. So the Department for Education assume that large employers with levy accounts will only pay about or use about 55% of that levy, which you've shown is the case, because the rest of the money is used to fund non-levy paying apprenticeships and to fund the Department for Education's programme. So as we stand today, I think broadly speaking, that budget is spent stand fast about £100 million. So there's a big debate about what next for the levy, and of course the big debate also is, well, the Treasury has got 400 million of additional levy funds that could be used for apprenticeships in England, which aren't. And I think that's the bit to focus on. If there's any part of the Treasury's hand in this, is what is that? And for training providers for whom profit margins are quite low, is to ensure that they can actually stay in business and deliver the apprenticeships as we go forward. So what's on the horizon? Well, I mentioned the fact that it was broadly speaking spent. And actually, there was a lot of panic from certain quarters, particularly organisations that deliver the higher level apprenticeships, level 6 and level 7. There was going to be some rationing imposed in the autumn statement, and there was a lot of campaigning to avoid that, and it didn't happen. And that would be a bad thing, because once you grow a programme and then you start to ration it, that in itself becomes self-defeating. So it's quite clear that the Conservative Party, if remaining in power, will look at targeting the levy in different areas to ensure that those in most need get it. And we'll perhaps come back to that. I think it's very clear with the Labour Party that they are talking about expanding the use of the levy and broadening it, and that could lead to an increase in levy taxation. Because if you're going to expand the use of a spent programme, you either generate more money or you reduce what you spend it on if you're going to broaden it elsewhere. And I would commend people to look at the Chartered Management Institute Levy 2.0 report, because it's a very balanced paper and it talks through the implications of expanding spend, and in particular, if spend is expanded, what it could do to reduce the funding available for apprenticeships. So it's not an either or you can spend it elsewhere and still sustain apprenticeships. It's about squeezing a balloon. And if you squeeze it in a certain place and it pops up in one place, clearly that volume is moved from elsewhere. So that's the view of the current system. And perhaps in questions we can explore as we go through some of the other areas, because when we did a session with the CMI, some of the things that popped up were around functional skills and the issues with functional skills, and the fact that employers inherit young people who pop out the education without these skills, and then all of a sudden it's the employer's responsibility to deliver skills that the education failed to do so. So there's functional skills. I think the other thing that popped up from an employer's perspective was the support and pastoral care needed in order to deliver effective apprenticeships. And that was a big theme of discussion about just what that looks like and the levels of investment and how you engage the workforce and get a positive from it, because what we get from our members is actually employees that engage in that process. You get a better employee engagement from it, but it's a significant investment. And I think the final one, which popped out, and this is current state, was modularity of apprenticeships. Is, yes, there are different standards, but within the different apprenticeship programs, actually some of the skills that are being developed are very similar. So could you port them across to different apprenticeship programs if you left? So that was where we were.
Yeah.
And that was a discussion about current state. I think the problem is, though, we're all absorbed with the here and now, and this paradigm, which is, you leave school, you learn a skill, and then you do that for 50 years. Well, unfortunately, that ship has sailed, because ChatGPT popped up 18 months or so ago and reminded us that the information age is not something that's going to occur in the future, it's here and now. And this notion of a static, stable skills base is a misnomer. And actually what employers are thinking about is, how can we rapidly evolve the system? And the one thing I think we'll all agree with the system, if it takes 7 years in a trailblazer group to agree a standard for a skill that comes in and pops out again in 5 years' time, that's not agile enough. And therefore, not only have we got some issues with the here and now, but we've really, really got to get to grips with the future. And I think, the panel discussion, we've got some great panelists, and we can explore that. So that's the perspective from the 5% Club. And I think our message is, let's solve the here and now, but actually let's keep a weather eye on the future, and how we can evolve the system today so it is fit for the future moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Some really interesting reflections and points raised there, which leads on nicely to our first bit of interactivity, and hopefully this works seamlessly. So if we go to if we look at sort of what current challenges you may be facing when looking to implement apprenticeships. So if you scan that QR code, hopefully you've all had the opportunity to do that already. And there are some options for you to select there, and also if it's something not listed there, if you highlight it in other, and perhaps we can explore some of this in the questioning section. So Chloe, if we can begin to see that hopefully come through. Excellent. So looking at sort of misconceptions, we know that's a constant theme, tackling those, time constraints, of course. Measuring that ROI piece is often a key objective, particularly when looking to win hearts and minds of the business. Where to start? That's good to see that that's at the lower scale at 16%. So hopefully most of the people in the room have embarked and engaged with apprenticeships to date. That's an equal split there across misconceptions, time constraints, and hearts and minds of the business. Interesting. Brilliant. Well, that's really helpful to see, and to be honest, that's what we expected, given the conversations we're regularly having with clients. And the best part of being in this space and working with employers is helping them have that light bulb moment when they do recognise the opportunity of apprenticeships, and actually how creative you can be in terms of your approach, and some of that will come onto in the panel discussion. So that leads me nicely to hand back to Mark, who'll chair the panel discussion segment. Please feed in any questions as we progress through this part, and I'll keep a lookout for the chat function. So Mark, I will hand back over to you to kick off the panel discussion and Q&A.
Fabulous. Thanks very much, Adil. And thank you everyone for your participation with Slido. I know it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to get technology to work, but you clearly all mastered it. So thank you for that. And it's great that we're joined this morning with some real insightful and expert panel members that we can explore some of the issues a bit more further forward. And I will just say at this stage, Fiona and I are not related. before anyone thinks there's some kind of nepotism going on in the organisation. But there's clearly some heritage there somewhere. So there was a lot of things in that Slido which we can explore, and I think one of those that came up was around return on investment, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges employers face. You know, why bother with an apprenticeship when you can just go and recruit someone with the skills? So I'll start really, and Fiona, I'll come to you first. And what I'd ask you to do, before you answer the question I'm just about to pose, can you just tell us who Group M are and a bit about yourself, so our audience have got that insight? But the question really is around the choices you made in Group M around building that data capability, using apprenticeships to do so rather than other routes, and what those other routes could be, and how you sort of squared the circle on ROI. And if I could come to you with that question. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And I'm glad you mentioned that we weren't, you know, it's not a family affair, but maybe there's a clan, you know, somewhere in Scotland that we belong to. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to the 5% Club and for Grant Thornton for inviting me onto the panel. I find apprentices, the future of them, very exciting, and so do Group M. So I joined Group M about 2 years ago, and I came in as a senior learning development business partner. And Group M is WPP's media and investment and services group. And I am part of the internal learning and development team that is part of Group M University. So we do have an internal learning hub, but we also look to maximize, improve, elevate, and integrate apprenticeships as part of our learning sort of offering within our organization. And I was brought into the company quite new to apprenticeships, but to give a fresh eye on what we could do, how we could, again, win hearts and minds, how we could look at some of the issues that were so succinctly brought out in that Slido panel there. So that was a nice light question to start with, Mark. I appreciate that. And there are some tricky, sticky questions there, because these are ones that we get asked. One of the reasons we chose apprenticeships, one was to utilize our levy. Our, you know, learning and development budgets are constantly under pressure to deliver multi-skills across our agency. And one of the reasons why we chose the apprenticeships was because we were able to do a skills gap analysis, look at how we wanted to be, as you were saying, that future-facing, that flexible, future-facing workforce that we're going to be able to, in a couple of years' time, work with the kind of skills that we wanted within our agency. And we looked at data, and the reason why we chose data is we have data specialists. And what we wanted to do was make lots of people within our agency data proficient, not only data analytics, but also data storytelling. And that was a big thing for us. How do we take the data that's coming in and be able to tell a story and be able to make that data accessible to people internal to our company, but also externally to our clients? So that was the ask. And we actually worked with Grant Thornton. We actually looked at the best possible way of doing that. So we had a sort of collaboration and a discussion about how we could do that within the company. And we chose an apprenticeship that we felt was the right level, had the right content, and was the right match for what we wanted. And the reason we chose the apprenticeship was, one, to utilize the levy, that's that. But also the big thing was that the job descriptions of the people who go on to the apprenticeship have to match the training. So we know that it was a good fit, and we knew that there was going to be that symbiotic, hopefully, crossing of skills, that they were learning something new within the apprenticeship, and that was feeding back in those 2 years into the business. And we also looked at our partnership with Grant Thornton and looked at how can we make it a richer experience. And one of the reasons we did that was because we wanted to have this hearts and minds. We wanted to revamp and rebrand, if you want, well, how apprenticeships were looked at within our agency. And obviously we're an advertising media agency. So we rebranded that internally as a program called The Edge. And it was for data acceleration within our agency. And we also had a 2-day launch that we worked with, and we had lots of upskilling for that 2-day launch. As well as that, we were able to do some, get some feedback from the candidates on the apprenticeship. They wanted learning, they wanted leadership and management skills, they wanted data storytelling skills, and we actually set some programs up internally to complement the apprenticeship. So for us, it was really, one of the benefits is that the apprenticeship was 2 years, and one of the downsides is it's 2 years, because you really do have to, as you said earlier, Mark, is that time investment, that expectation of what is actually needed within your company to make this a successful journey. And it is support, it is pastoral care, and we do that internally, and we also do that with Grant Thornton and BPP, who we work with. And the way that we look at it is it's a triangle of support around the apprenticeship and the apprentice. And we have obviously our line managers that we do line manager training with, and we support them to be able to integrate that apprenticeship into their business and their day-to-day. And there are constraints with time, there always is. And then we have the external learning partner. They work with you and advise you and really support you to get the best out of that 2-year or 3-year or 5 years or whatever it is apprenticeship. And then there's that cultural thing. You have to get key stakeholders within the company to support, you know, what you're doing, and to support the fact that you do need that time. You do need that, you know, resource within the company to support apprenticeships. So I hope that's answered a little bit. I didn't actually skirt on the ROI, because that is a really big question, and I could talk about that for a little bit more, but I don't know if that answered the first part of the question.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful and a really useful insight about utilising the levy, and the levy is a catalyst to push apprenticeships, but actually it's got much bigger than that. So I might come back to you in a moment, Fiona, but I'm going to move on to our second panelist. So Katie, you've heard that, and Fiona's described you know, a digital industry, media industry, you know, very fast moving. But prior to being a director in Grant Thornton, which I hope you'll talk a bit more about, you were with Kier. And the perception is that construction is not digital and it's a different skill set. So are there any parallels with what you saw in Kier to what Fiona was saying there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Great to be here today. Just, I guess, a bit of an introduction for me. So I am part of the Grant Thornton team. I've been a director here for a little while, but been with Grant Thornton now for 4.5 years. And as Mark said, prior to that, I was head of early careers at Kier Group, which is in construction and infrastructure, and led basically our kind of group early careers offering, which was close to 1,000 individuals on that programme. And a large part was around developing apprenticeships. So I chaired a number of the standards, and yes, it does take a long time to do those. I think it was about 5 years and we managed to get one of them through. So a real kind of passion of mine to do that. So at the moment, I work with clients across the people agenda. So I look at it, you know, in a much more kind of holistic approach in terms of strategic workforce planning. But again, you know, really make sure that we kind of understand how all of the kind of the learning fits more broadly in terms of the people strategy. I guess the one thing I didn't mention is I've got a real connection with the 5% Club since my time at Kier, so I'm a fellow as well. So even though I kind of work across the people agenda, I still have a huge passion, you know, personally around building apprenticeships, and particularly around that helping support growing diversity in an organisation as well. So I guess to talk to your question around you know, apprenticeships and building some of those skills, you know, there is still this misconception, certainly within apprenticeships, that it's it's very much your lower levels. You know, people think about that in terms of it. They're great for trades, you know, for those sorts of things. And again, construction, again, that was that misconception. But one of the things while I was working in that role was not only to kind of bring together a very disparate apprenticeships offering, we pulled together very much a group-wide approach, and that required me to really kind of feed into the overall kind of strategic workforce plan. How is this going to benefit? And again, we know that, you know, apprenticeships, they are more of a long-term investment, but actually, you know, they really can make a difference. And we started to look at where, rather than just considering those at sort of more sort of lower levels and more trades, we actually were able to develop some really technical and digital based apprenticeships. So we created actually an award-winning program around building information modeling, very technical, and it's been a really great success. And I've seen a number of those apprentices brought through now going into senior roles. It makes me feel a little bit old because I saw these very fresh-faced, and they were quite fresh-faced apprentices, but they are now really doing fantastically well. And I think this comes to that point around, we were really clear about how those apprenticeships fitted within our people strategy, and how they were going to build the skills of the future. And we knew that from the understanding of how we see a lot more loyalty and commitment when we see people go through apprenticeships, we can now prove that data point to say, well, actually, we've seen the commitment and longevity of those people we invested in. And yes, there was an investment. We had to put a lot of a framework around those apprentices, but we've seen that kind of pay dividends. And obviously, sometimes when you're first building that business case, it's very difficult to prove that. But there are now lots of examples, you know, those at Kier included, but also in Grant Thornton ourselves, in terms of how we've been able to see that return on investment through retention, through you know, creating diversity of kind of individuals coming through who wouldn't ordinarily have perhaps kind of come through our very traditional approach to kind of building skills before. With our we abolished our qualification criteria as well. You know, we've really seen that kind of pay dividends across, like I say, not only kind of building and generating skills, retaining them, but also seeing the diversity come through that sort of emerging talent route. So I think, you know, we've seen a huge amount around kind of where we can access lots of different kind of really key skills that we can see growing in the future. But my kind of biggest thing that I see when I'm talking to clients at the moment, and I support clients now to develop a more group-wide early career strategy and the framework to support that. But is constantly the first question is, how does this fit with your strategic workforce plan? Often I kind of get a blank face going, we don't even have a strategic workforce plan. And this is not your small and medium-sized businesses. I'm sitting in front of, you know, listed businesses that can't show me a plan. And if there isn't even that plan, how do we actually make sure that the apprenticeships and those programs we've got, how that actually fits to achieve that? So we're working a lot more kind of at that higher level to make sure that it really kind of feeds in and get that true sponsorship around apprenticeships and more broader kind of, you know, earn and learn programs, so that you can see that. And I think a big thing around the digital piece, Mark, that you mentioned is, again, what we often find, particularly when I'm working with sort of people functions, is that lack of data integrity to really support that business case. So, you know, getting that right. And I'm so pleased to see the HR aligned data apprenticeship that I've been a part of as well, that we've been sort of supporting to develop, because that's going to really build that skill set within people teams to, you know, get the right data, make sure you're using and you're telling a story with that data, to be able to kind of really build the business plan, track that return on investment as you go through. So loads of opportunity there. But I think just making sure that we've got a real kind of support framework around educating the business, having a really strong kind of strategic workforce plan, and how this all fits through. I'll pause there because I could talk about this all day, Mark. I'll tell you.
That's brilliant. Your passion comes through, Katie. That's really helpful. And I could see with some of the people on camera that actually, when you talked about accidental strategic workforce planning, there was a lot of wry smiles and a lot of nodding of heads. I find it interesting. I've got a military background, and the strategic workforce plan is decades or centuries long, almost there. And when I left the military and came out into the real world, I realized most people are worried about the end of next week, and next year is a light year away. So perhaps we can come back to the strategic workforce planning aspects and the importance of that in the wider Q&A. Just in the interest of time, I just want to move across to Karen. And Karen, we've talked a lot about the levy, and we've talked about the employers that use the levy. And after you've introduced yourself and Cross Country Trains, a member of the 5% Club, which is great to have you with us. You're actually, I know you're part of a group, but Cross Country Trains are overutilising your levy. Can you just sort of pass some tips on how you got there and what that means and what happens next?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so just a quick introduction then. So my name's Karen Aldwick and I lead on apprenticeships and training at Cross Country, which I'm very excited and passionate about, along with the rest of our colleagues. So thank you very much for the invite today. It's great to be here during National Apprenticeship Week. So I've probably spent in the region of the last 10 years in and around apprenticeships in various different roles. And I've been at Cross Country for the last 4 years. So when I started with Cross Country, there wasn't really any forms of apprenticeships at all in the business. So for me, really, it was very much around that kind of education, that sort of stakeholder engagement piece, building understanding, breaking down some of those barriers that people have around apprenticeships, and like the previous panelists have touched on, those kind of misconceptions around what apprenticeships are and the benefits. So the first, I would say, 12 months or more was very much around working with the senior stakeholders, the regional teams, and obviously the executive teams to raise awareness and to encourage people to sort of listen in and understand what apprenticeships are all about. I think one of the main driving factors of kind of getting that buy-in initially was around the fact that our apprenticeship levy was fairly substantial. So we were paying in kind of huge amounts every month, and none of that was being utilised. And I think once that was sort of brought to light, it was very much then a question of, well, actually, we've got, lots of people in our business, lots of training needs. Actually, we are in a position where we do very much have a kind of an aging workforce. So we're looking at kind of quite a high retirement profile in the coming sort of few years. So it was very much a point of actually this, we need to make some changes, and we need to look at our workforce plan, look at our retirement profiles and where those gaps will be sort of coming through. So it was really for us at Cross Country. I think one of the dangers you can have is to sort of think, right, there's so much to do, and you kind of tap in and you do a bit of dabbling here, there and everywhere. And that is a temptation, because you want to get everything up and off the ground, and you want to kind of make these really fast changes. And what I would say, particularly in my industry, is that things need to be done, at the right pace. And actually, part of that gaining hearts and minds is, I would say, probably fairly slow and steady at the start. So pick an area, pick a focus, and get that right first before you start trying to roll out numerous programs in numerous departments and divisions. So for me in Cross Country, the first sort of point of contact was around kind of our operational training. So again, we're very lucky in our industry. It does lend itself very well to the apprenticeship model. If we take trained drivers, for example, it isn't as easy. So I know some businesses kind of poach or take people from other kind of industries for trained driving. It's not as straightforward as that. I mean, there's a lot of press around the salaries of trained drivers, so it's not like you can just kind of throw money at the problem. And people are based in particular areas, particularly with us at Cross Country, obviously as a long distance operator. So we needed a different approach. So we have used the trained driver apprenticeship, and we really have had a lot of success with that. So it's around that really clear plan around the training, how the apprenticeship supports that, building in the time for, I know we've touched on kind of maths and English before, but making sure that there's sort of real dedicated time and resource to support that, so that we are making sure that everybody who comes on that apprenticeship journey understands it from beginning to end and has that support around what they need to achieve and actually the benefits to their career of completing those. So you actually asked around sort of utilising of the levy. We are now utilising our payments. Obviously, we have got quite a big reserve pool that we do now sort of tap into. I think that the fact of us utilising that levy is the apprenticeship standards we undertake are fairly costly. So that obviously contributes towards the amount of money that we use. So that the train driver one is, kind of in the 20+ bracket. So, if you put a dozen or more of those two, that's a considerable chunk of the levy that we are using. And it's very much then around kind of where else can we use it. So it's piece by piece, working through the business, looking at where the gaps are, mapping our current training. Somebody else mentioned that sort of those 600 plus apprenticeship standards. So it's actually very much looking at what training are we delivering, where are our gaps, what are the apprenticeship standards that we can either use to support that or in place of other training. So it's I would say my biggest tip would be, don't sort of try and boil the ocean, one thing at a time, to build the strategy slowly and securely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karen. Really insightful and great. And I've noticed in chat there's a number of questions coming through, which Adil will pick up on, I know, around levy, etc. Just in the interest of time, we've got 3 minutes before our next Slido interruption. So, Katie, can I just come back to you around this strategic workforce planning? And Fiona, I might ask you to chip in on ROI. But, picking up on Karen's point about having a careful strategy, where do you start? Do you go skilled hires? Do you go graduates? Do you invest in the current workforce? Do you go new skill? How on earth do you unlock that from a strategic workforce planning perspective?
I mean, there's a number of things that you've got to do first, I think, from a broader kind of strategic workforce plan. You've got to understand, well, what is it? What are the skills that you need to deliver, the services, the products, etc., that you need for the future? So you've really got to understand that. You've got to understand your pipeline of work. Where is the work going to be? There's lots around workforce that you need to understand. Understand where your critical skills are. Where are the gaps that you've got, and how can those be plugged through perhaps that slightly longer term or upskilling, utilising apprenticeships in particular. So all of that has to feed in. So it's got to make sense, because the problem is that if you're trying to get buy-in, and I've seen a couple of questions kind of come through in terms of going, well, it's great that you've got this kind of strategic plan on paper, but how do you actually put it into practice? Well, fundamentally, if you don't get the right people who are going to influence and drive this, who are going to be, your senior leaders, your people in the business who are having to kind of deal with this, whether it's kind of customer facing or business to business, they're the ones that are going to be going, okay, I'll take on apprentices, and yes, I will invest my time, my team's time in this. So we've really got to make sure that we understand how this is going to meet their needs and how they're going to get the support to do this. So there's a lot of things that need to be thought through, not only kind of getting the right data to actually kind of sell the kind of the programs in, but also making sure that you're not just going, oh, well, there's a standard over here that we might be able to use, so let's just throw that into the offering and hope it sticks. It really needs to be thought through carefully with a clear plan and justification, so that the business will truly buy into it. And again, don't try and boil an ocean with it either. If you are starting your journey, start with a pilot, get some success, prove concept, and then share that success story, because it's keeping up with the Joneses. If you can get some success stories and really show how it works in practice, with all the things that are kind of, the myths around it's going to take too much time, they're not going to be valuable, it's going to cost me too much. Try and make sure that you can share all of that kind of knowledge and prove that concept, as I say, and then you'll start to roll out, and people will come to you and say, well, we want some of that. And that's what we saw in Kia after a time of doing this. And again, we're seeing within Grant Thornton, we've maxed out our levy because we've proved concept quite early on, but we did it in a really steady way. So that's where I would say kind of we need to start thinking through on the strategic side of things.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. Fiona, if I come to you for 30 seconds, because we're literally just about to go over time. And while we do that, Chloe, if you could pull up the next Slido, that'll be great. And that'll keep us on schedule.
Okay, from a point of ROI, it's always going to be slightly tricky. As you say, you need to get that buy-in from, some stats from HR, looking at benchmarks about what the normal rate of retention is, etc. So you can have benchmarks that you can look at those ROIs. Our simple things are stats like how many complete, how many stay on, following the journey of the apprentices after they complete their apprenticeships within the company, how long do they stay. We also have feedback forms, listening groups. We have teams of the apprenticeships that we have together. We have mentors, we have buddies, and all of that is information that we feed into what is the confidence level, which is a big thing that we have. We look at how they are growing and developing their personal and professional skills back in the teams. So it's joining the dots between every touch point within the business and making sure that we have a really good relationship with the learning provider, so that if there's any red flags with them going along with their learning, we are looking at those and making sure that we give the apprentices the biggest chance to succeed in what they're doing. And that way it feeds back into the company. Either you have a learning culture or you don't. And there's a Henry Ford quote, which I love, is the only thing worse than training your employees and having them leave is not training them and having them stay. So it's just an ongoing learning culture that we want to have, and that is a biggest ROI.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Fiona. We're still on schedule, so Adil will thank me for that. I will just put a shameless plug in for the 5% Club in this point, because we've talked about pastoral support, and clearly, you know, with 1,000 members in our regular catch-ups, what we find with our members is there's a safe space to have these discussions with other professionals, to draw best practice. We've got various schemes, but we run events. I know Grant Thornton run events. I would just encourage people to keep talking to other professionals, because that's the best way to learn, like today. Adil, back to you.
Some brilliant reflections and insights and great feedback in the chat there. So I'll pick out just one or two questions in the interest of time. So in terms of, we heard about sort of the impact of mentoring and buddying, and great to hear some of the feedback there from the speakers. But there was a question around how do you ensure sufficient support is given to apprentices that work hybrid? And we know particularly that early careers apprenticeship level, but that pastoral support and getting back into face-to-face environment can really be beneficial. So I'd like to pose that to the panel and actually see if anyone would like to give their perspective on that question and that transition to hybrid working.
I can't offer really much advice in that one, because obviously the nature of a lot of our roles is you physically can't do them from home. So other than a brief period of time during COVID, all of our apprentices, majority of our apprentices, are either on a train, in a simulator. Head office is obviously slightly different, but the majority of ours aren't. So I can't really offer any guidance on the hybrid option, sorry.
Thank you, Karen.
I guess I can talk to Grant Thornton. I mean, we work in a very hybrid way based on the work that we do, and I think some of the things that we do find is that, you know, we do need to put a bit more structure around kind of creating that network, you know. But actually, what we find is that once we've done that, and that is, you know, between making sure that people managers, you know, understand, you know, how to support individuals in a hybrid way, that they are encouraged to think through kind of working, you know, bringing together sort of face to face, but also how you can do that engagement, you know, in a hybrid way. So that there's that piece. But I think when we start to create that structure for the peer-to-peer network with apprentices, and actually we kind of buddy up graduates with apprentices as well, so we utilize the early careers network in that way, but it starts to just run themselves, and they create their own groups, and they do that. But we also ensure that we try and do reverse mentoring, which again gives access to sort of more experienced, you know, sort of leaders and managers in the business, so that we can maintain that kind of almost that work shadowing and that kind of knowledge transfer. So we do a couple of different things, but it takes a little bit of structure, but it then starts to kind of you know, perpetuate itself really. So that's kind of how we do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. So you will have seen the Slido in the chat there. Hopefully you've had a chance to share with us in terms of areas that you'd like to explore further. Some brilliant insights from Mark and the panel of speakers. If we go to the next slide, just in terms of some top tips perhaps to look at starting to optimize apprenticeships in addition to what you've heard today. So one would be really starting at looking at the skills gap analysis of the business. What are the skills gaps you're looking to address? And importantly, where can apprenticeships play a role to support that? So as I mentioned in my introduction, over 600 standards in areas that you would expect to see. And I think we saw over the weekend the announcement of a new teaching degree apprenticeship, which will be launched next year. So there are apprenticeships in every area, and yeah, do have a look at the Government's Institute for Apprenticeships website as a good starting point there. Speak to quality training providers. There are fantastic training providers out there. They can really support in terms of that hand-holding process, particularly if you are at the start of your journey. Get involved with networking opportunities, membership bodies such as 5% Club, and just speak to people within your network, because it's really important to share best practice and insights in this important area. I think we've touched upon it today, the opportunity that's in front of organisations to look at how you can really align your apprenticeship strategy to support your wider people agenda and ESG. And we know there's a big focus for this year on green skills as well. But particularly on the wider people agenda, inclusion and diversity is a big focus for organisations, and apprenticeships can support that key area. And as I touched upon earlier, quick wins and some really good practice to be had is bringing your HR and finance communities together to collectively look at the opportunity for optimizing apprenticeships as well. So that's just a few top tips. I know there's a much more a longer list of some tips to be had there. And yes, some recommendations in there. The Apprenticeship Ambassador Network is a fantastic network to get involved in as well, and they do have regional groups to support. So I think we are on track for time. Perhaps I'll pick out one or two more questions, but what we will do, we'll share the recording for all of you for this morning, and also we will, yeah, you can see our details here should you wish to have a further conversation with the 5% Club or Grant Thornton as well. But before I pick out a question, I don't know if any of the panel of speakers has any reflections or closing remarks, and then Mark, I'll hand over to you as well to give your perspective.
All I would say, Adil, is it is T-level Thursday, and there is a question in the chat around T-levels, and there are a number of members of the 5% Club who have used T-level placements to recruit degree apprentices. So I think people are thinking about different pathways and using those pathways in a very powerful way. And some schools and colleges treat T-level students like they're almost an underclass, whereas a number of employers are looking at them as the gold standard, and it's a real sort of juxtaposition. So on T-level Thursday, I would commend people to look at T-levels and look at how placements can be used in your early talent strategies.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. So I would like to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers, Karen, Fiona, Katie, Mark. Really hope this has been insightful and some food for thought for you all to take away to your organisations. Enjoy the rest of National Apprenticeships Week. Let's continue to champion apprenticeships, and thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you all.